The smell of fresh paint couldn't mask the musty odor of the basement as I sat on the narrow cot my daughter had dragged down here 3 days ago. Above me, I could hear the excited chatter of wedding guests, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the soft melody of string quartet music drifting through the floorboards. My own daughter's wedding reception was happening directly over my head, and here I was, banished to the basement like some shameful family secret. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I pressed my trembling fingers against my temples, trying to make sense of how my life had come to this moment. 62 years old, a widow of 5 years, and now homeless in my own house. The house I had bought and paid for with my late husband, Robert's life insurance money. The house where I had planned to spend my golden years, surrounded by grandchildren and holiday gatherings. Instead, I was sitting in the dark, listening to my daughter celebrate the most important day of her life, while deliberately excluding me from it. The morning had started like any other Wednesday, except it wasn't just any Wednesday. It was Emma's wedding day, and I had been looking forward to this moment for months. My only child, my beautiful daughter, who had always been the light of my life, was finally marrying David, a man I had grown to love like the son I never had. Or so I thought. I had woken up early, around 5 in the morning, unable to sleep from the excitement. The caterers would be arriving at 7, the florists at 8, and Emma's bridal party at 9 for hair and makeup. As the mother of the, bride, I had planned to spend the day helping coordinate everything, making sure my daughter's special day went perfectly. I had even bought a beautiful lavender dress for the occasion, something that would photograph well but wouldn't upstage the bride. Robert would have been so proud. He had always doted on Emma, calling her his little princess even when she was in her 20s. When he passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, I thought Emma and I had grown closer through our shared grief. She had been so supportive during those dark months, helping me navigate the insurance paperwork, encouraging me to invest the settlement money wisely, and even suggesting I use some of it to buy this beautiful colonial house in Westfield. The house had been perfect, everything Robert and I had dreamed of but never been able to afford on his teacher's salary and my part-time work at the library. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen with granite countertops, and a beautiful backyard perfect for entertaining. Emma had been so enthusiastic about it, talking about how wonderful it would be for family gatherings, and how her future children would love having such a big yard to play in. What I didn't realize at the time was that Emma saw the house as more than just my new home. She saw it as her inheritance, her future, her ticket to the lifestyle she had always wanted but couldn't afford on her administrative assistant salary. The first sign that something had changed came about 6 months ago when Emma announced her engagement to David. I was thrilled, of course, but confused when she immediately started talking about having the wedding at our house. Not my house, but our house. When I gently corrected her, explaining that while she was always welcome, this was my home, her expression had shifted to something I had never seen before. Something cold and calculating. That's when the conversations about my future started. Emma began expressing concern about me living alone in such a big house. Wouldn't I be happier in a nice senior community? Wouldn't it make more sense to downsize? Think of all the money I could save, the new friends I could make, the activities I could enjoy. At first, I thought she was genuinely worried about my well-being. I was touched by her concern, even if I had no intention of leaving the home I had just begun to truly love. But as the months passed, Emma's suggestions became more insistent, more frequent. She started bringing David over for dinner several times a week, and I noticed how they would walk through the house together, discussing changes they would make, improvements they would implement. They talked about my home as if I wasn't there, as if it was already theirs. When I tried to address this, Emma would deflect with talk about my age, my health, my safety. She pointed out that I was getting forgetful, that I had fallen in the garden last spring and could have seriously hurt myself. She worried about me being isolated, about what would happen if I had an emergency and no one was around to help. Her arguments were persuasive and delivered with such apparent love and concern that I almost began to believe she was right. The pressure intensified when wedding planning began in earnest. Emma insisted that having the wedding at the house would save thousands of dollars that they simply didn't have. David was working as a mechanic at a local garage, and Emma's salary barely covered her apartment rent and student loans. They couldn't afford a traditional wedding venue, and wouldn't it be wonderful to have such a meaningful celebration in the family home? I agreed, of course. What mother wouldn't want to host her daughter's wedding? But Emma's vision for the event seemed to grow more elaborate with each passing week. What started as a simple backyard ceremony for 50 guests had evolved into a 200-person extravaganza, requiring extensive renovations to accommodate everyone. The living room needed new flooring to handle the foot traffic. The kitchen required professional-grade appliances to support the catering. The bathrooms needed updating to handle the number of guests. The backyard needed landscaping, a new deck, and a dance floor. Each improvement was presented as something that would benefit me in the long run, investments that would increase the property value and make my life more comfortable. But I wasn't paying for these improvements. Emma had somehow convinced me to add her name to the house deed, arguing that it would make estate planning easier and ensure a smooth transition when I eventually decided to downsize. With her name on the deed, she was able to take out a home equity loan to fund the wedding renovations. I found out about the loan after it was already approved, when Emma presented it as a fait accompli, assuring me that she and David would handle all the payments. Looking back now, I can see how masterfully I had been manipulated. Every conversation, every suggestion, every expression of concern had been carefully calculated to lead me to this point. Emma hadn't just planned a wedding, she had orchestrated a complete takeover of my life, my home, and my financial security. The final humiliation had come this morning when I woke up to find my bedroom door locked from the outside. I had pounded on the door, calling for Emma, assuming it was some kind of mistake. When she finally appeared, she wasn't alone. David was with her, along with two men I didn't recognize, one of whom was carrying a clipboard and wearing a badge. "Mom, we need to talk," Emma had said, her voice eerily calm. "There's been a change of plans," she explained, in the same tone she might use to discuss the weather, that I would be staying in the basement during the wedding festivities. The master bedroom was needed for the bridal party to get ready, and my presence would be disruptive to the timeline they had carefully planned. It was just for today, she assured me, just until the reception was over and the last guest had gone home. But as she spoke, the man with the clipboard handed her a folder of documents. Legal documents. I realized with growing horror that would transfer full ownership of the house to Emma. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. All I needed to do was sign, and everything would be taken care of. My living situation, my finances, my future. Emma had it all figured out. There was a lovely assisted living facility just 20 minutes away where I could live comfortably. On my Social Security and the small pension from the library, I would be so much happier there, surrounded by people my own age, with activities and meals provided, and no worries about home maintenance or safety. When I refused to sign, Emma's mask of concern slipped completely. The daughter I had raised, loved and sacrificed for, looked at me with undisguised contempt. I was being selfish, she said. I was ruining her wedding day with my stubbornness. Couldn't I see that this arrangement benefited everyone? She and David needed the space and couldn't afford to buy their own home. I was getting older and wouldn't be able to maintain such a large property much longer anyway. Why was I making this so difficult? The two men with Emma turned out to be movers. While we argued, they began carrying my belongings down to the basement. Not all of my belongings, of course, just the essentials. My clothes, some personal items, a few pieces of furniture that Emma deemed appropriate for my new basement accommodations. Everything else would stay with the house. After all, Emma reasoned, I wouldn't need such a large wardrobe or so many possessions in my new simplified lifestyle. I watched in stunned silence as they dismantled my life, carrying away photo albums, Robert's books, the china set that had been my mother's. When I protested, Emma assured me that everything was being carefully stored and that I could have anything I truly needed once I was settled in my new home. But first, I needed to sign the papers. Everything depended on my cooperation. The basement had been finished as part of the wedding renovations, Emma explained. They had installed a small bathroom, a kitchenette, and a sleeping area. It was quite comfortable, really, almost like a studio apartment. I could think of it as a trial run for independent living. If I could manage down here for a few days, surely I could manage in a proper senior facility. As the morning progressed and wedding preparations began upstairs, I realized that this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about permanently removing me from my own home. The basement wasn't a temporary solution. It was a prison designed to break my will and force me to sign away everything I owned. The sound of laughter drifted down from above as Emma's friends arrived for the pre-wedding festivities. I could hear my daughter's voice, bright and cheerful, thanking everyone for coming to celebrate in her beautiful home. Not our home, not my home, her home. As if I had never existed, as if my 5 years of mortgage payments and careful maintenance meant nothing. I tried the basement door and found it locked. Not just closed, but locked with a deadbolt I could hear clicking from the other side. When I called up the stairs, asking to speak with Emma, David's voice responded that she was busy with wedding preparations and couldn't be disturbed. Perhaps I should use this time to rest and think about what would be best for everyone. The isolation was crushing. I could hear the sounds of my own house being transformed above me, could hear strangers walking through rooms I had carefully decorated, could hear Emma playing the role of the gracious hostess in the home I had provided. But I might as well have been on another planet for all the connection I felt to the celebration happening overhead. As the afternoon wore on, I began to understand the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about getting me to sign ownership papers. Emma had been planning this for months, possibly years. The timing of the wedding, the renovations, the home equity loan, even adding her name to the deed. It had all been leading to this moment when I would be completely powerless to resist. The saddest part was realizing how thoroughly I had been deceived. Every expression of love, every moment of apparent closeness since Robert's death, had been calculated manipulation. Emma hadn't been grieving with me. She had been planning how to capitalize on my grief. She hadn't been concerned about my well-being. She had been orchestrating my downfall. I thought about Robert and how devastated he would be to see what had become of the daughter he adored. He had worked 2 jobs for years to pay for Emma's college education, believing that we were investing in her future success and happiness. He had been so proud when she graduated, so hopeful about the life she would build. Never in his wildest nightmares could he have imagined that she would one day lock his wife in a basement to steal everything he had worked for. The wedding ceremony took place in the backyard around 4 o'clock. I could hear the music, the vows, the applause. I pressed my ear to the small basement window, trying to catch a glimpse of my daughter in her wedding dress. But the angle was wrong. All I could see were the feet of guests walking past, the hems of formal dresses, the occasional dropped napkin or flower petal. When Emma was a little girl, we used to play wedding. She would drape herself in my old curtains and march around the house holding a bouquet of dandelions while Robert hummed the wedding march. I would pretend to cry happy tears as she promised to always love her mommy and daddy and to take care of us when we got old. The cruel irony of that childhood game wasn't lost on me now. After the ceremony, the reception began in earnest. The sounds of celebration above me grew louder. Music, dancing, the clink of silverware against china. I wondered if any of the guests knew I existed, if anyone had asked where the mother of the bride was. Probably Emma had some plausible explanation. Maybe I was ill, or traveling, or simply chose not to attend. Given Emma's gift for manipulation, I had no doubt she could spin a believable story that would satisfy anyone's curiosity. As evening approached, my situation began to feel increasingly desperate. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the small kitchenette in the basement contained nothing but a few bottles of water and some crackers. The bathroom was functional but cramped, clearly designed as a powder room rather than a living space. The single bed was narrow and uncomfortable, with sheets that smelled of the same mustiness that permeated the entire basement. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. This was my daughter, the child I had carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, cheered at school plays and graduations, loved unconditionally for 28 years. How had I failed so completely as a mother that she could treat me with such callous cruelty? I tried to remember when things had started to change between us. Had there been signs I missed? Moments when I should have seen through her facade of loving concern? Looking back, I could identify dozens of red flags, but at the time, they had all seemed like normal expressions of a daughter's love for her aging mother. Emma's constant questions about my finances, her insistence on being involved in my legal and medical decisions, her subtle criticisms of my independence. I had interpreted all of this as caring involvement rather than calculated control. The worst part was the isolation. Not just the physical isolation of being locked in the basement, but the emotional isolation of realizing that the person I trusted most in the world had been systematically betraying that trust. If I couldn't trust Emma, who could I trust? If my own daughter could deceive me so completely, how could I ever trust my judgment about anyone again? As the reception continued above me, I found myself thinking about the other people in my life. My sister Margaret lived in Florida, and we only spoke a few times a year. My few close friends were mostly widows like myself, and I hadn't been very social since Robert's death. Emma had been my primary connection to the world, my main source of companionship and support. By isolating me from other relationships, she had made herself indispensable while simultaneously positioning herself to exploit that dependence. The music upstairs shifted to slow songs, and I realized they must be having the traditional dances. Father-daughter dance, mother-son dance, the first dance between bride and groom, except there would be no mother-daughter dance because the mother was locked in the basement like a prisoner. I wondered if Emma felt even a moment's sadness about my absence, or if she was too busy enjoying her triumph to spare a thought for the woman who had given her life meaning. Around 10 o'clock, the noise began to die down. Guests were leaving, saying their goodbyes, thanking Emma for a wonderful celebration. Car doors slammed in the driveway, engines started, voices faded into the distance. Eventually, the house grew quiet except for the sounds of cleanup. Dishes being collected, furniture being moved, the general bustle of post-party tidying. I waited, hoping that Emma would come down to check on me, to explain what would happen. Next, to show some sign of the loving daughter I thought I knew. But hours passed and no one came. The house grew completely silent, and I realized that Emma and David had probably gone to bed in my former bedroom, exhausted from their perfect wedding day. I lay down on the narrow cot and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settling around me. Upstairs was my real bed, with the memory foam mattress Robert and I had saved up to buy, with the quilts my mother had made, with the family photos on the nightstand. Upstairs was my kitchen, with the ceramic bowls Emma had made in high school, pottery class still displayed on the windowsill. Upstairs was my living room, with the piano Robert had bought so Emma could take lessons, with the bookcases filled with the novels we had collected over 25 years of marriage. All of it was still there, but none of it was mine anymore. Even if I never signed the transfer papers, Emma's name was already on the deed. Even if I fought this legally, how could I prove what had happened? Who would believe that a sweet young bride had locked her elderly mother in the basement on her wedding day? Emma was smart enough to make it look like I was the problem, the difficult old woman who couldn't accept her daughter's happiness, who needed to be managed for her own good. The hopelessness of my situation began to sink in. I had no money except my Social Security and small pension. I had no car since Emma had convinced me to sell it last year, arguing that I was getting too old to drive safely. I had no friends close enough to turn to for help, no family nearby who might question my sudden disappearance. Emma had spent years systematically eliminating my independence and isolating me from potential sources of support. But as I lay there, in the darkness, feeling sorry for myself and cataloging all the ways I had been betrayed, something began to shift inside me. Maybe it was anger finally breaking through the shock and grief. Maybe it was pride refusing to let me accept defeat. Or maybe it was Robert's voice in my memory, reminding me that I was stronger than I knew. I thought about the life Robert and I had built together, how we had overcome financial struggles and family tragedies and health scares through sheer determination and mutual support. I thought about the years I had worked at the library, helping patrons navigate complex research problems, managing difficult situations with patience and creativity. I thought about the months after Robert's death when I had somehow found the strength to handle funeral arrangements, insurance paperwork, and the overwhelming process of learning to live alone. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't just a confused old woman who needed to be managed by her daughter. I was a 62-year-old woman with a functioning brain, a lifetime of experience, and resources Emma didn't know about. More importantly, I was a woman who had been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. The first thing I needed to do was get out of this basement. I examined the door carefully, looking for any weakness in the locker frame. The deadbolt was solid, professionally installed as part of the renovation. But the door itself was hollow core, standard for interior doors, and the frame was basic pine trim. With the right tool and enough determination, I might be able to break through. I searched the basement for anything that might serve as a prying tool. The movers had been thorough in removing anything potentially useful, but they had missed a few items. In a corner behind the water heater, I found an old crowbar that had been left by the renovation crew. It was rusty and not ideal, but it might work if I could get the right leverage. Working as quietly as possible, I began to examine the door frame more closely. The deadbolt was solid, but the strike plate was only held in place by 3 small screws. If I could work the crowbar behind the trim molding and apply steady pressure, I might be able to split the wood enough to pop the strike plate loose. It took nearly an hour of careful, quiet work, but eventually I felt the wood beginning to give way. The strike plate shifted slightly, then a little more, and finally came free with a soft, splintering sound that seemed thunderously loud in the quiet house. I froze, listening for any sign that I had been heard, but the house remained silent. The door opened easily once the lock was defeated. I stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, free but unsure what to do next. It was after midnight, and Emma and David were presumably asleep in my bedroom. I could confront them now, demand. They let me back into my own house, threatened to call the police. But what would that accomplish? Emma would probably claim I was having some kind of mental episode, that I had imagined being locked up, that I was confused and needed help. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed evidence, documentation, proof of what had been done, to me. And I needed to understand exactly what legal trap Emma had set for me so I could figure out how to escape it. I crept up the stairs and into the kitchen, moving carefully in the darkness. The house felt different, not just because of the wedding decorations and rearranged furniture, but because it no longer felt like home. It felt like enemy territory, a place where I was no longer welcome despite having paid for every square inch of it. The manila folder with the legal documents was still sitting on the kitchen counter where Emma had left it. I turned on a small lamp and began to read, my heart sinking with each page. The documents were comprehensive and professionally prepared. If I signed them, I would transfer full ownership of the house to Emma, with the understanding that I would move to Sunset Manor assisted living within 30 days. But there were other documents in the folder that I hadn't seen earlier. A psychological evaluation form, already partially filled out, describing me as confused, possibly suffering from early dementia, and unable to live independently. A medical power of attorney that would give Emma control over my healthcare decisions. A financial power of attorney that would give her control over my remaining assets. The scope of Emma's plan was breathtaking. She wasn't just stealing my house. She was stealing my entire life, my autonomy, my right to make decisions about my own future. Once I signed these documents, I would essentially become her ward, dependent on her goodwill for everything from medical care to spending money. I photographed each page with my phone, though I wasn't sure why. Who would I show them to? Who would believe that my loving daughter could be capable of such calculated abuse? But having the photos made me feel like I was doing something productive, taking some small step toward fighting back. As I worked my way through the documents, one name kept appearing. Dr. Patricia Coleman, the psychologist who had supposedly evaluated my mental state. I had never heard of Dr. Coleman, had certainly never been evaluated by her, yet her signature appeared on multiple forms attesting to my diminished capacity and need for supervised care. This was fraud, clear and simple. Emma had either forged a psychological evaluation or paid someone to create fake documentation. Either way, it was illegal and could be proven if I could find the right lawyer, the right investigator, the right person to believe my story. But first, I needed to get out of this house safely. Emma had already demonstrated that she was willing to imprison me to get what she wanted. If she discovered that I had escaped from the basement and seen the documents, there was no telling what she might do next. I needed to find somewhere safe to stay while I figured out how to fight back. I thought about my options. Hotels required credit cards, and Emma might be monitoring my accounts. Friends and family would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Shelters might not take someone who technically had a home, even if that home had become a prison. Then I remembered something Robert used to say about his old army buddy, Frank Morrison. If you're ever in real trouble, Frank's the kind of guy who would drop everything to help. Frank lived about an hour away and had always told me to call if I ever needed anything after Robert died. I had never taken him up on that offer, but maybe it was time. I found Frank's number in my phone and hesitated for a moment before dialing. It was nearly 2 a.m, and I would be waking him up with what would sound like an insane story. But Frank had served 2 tours in Vietnam and then worked as a police detective for 30 years before retiring. If anyone would understand that seemingly good people could be capable of terrible things, it would be Frank. The phone rang 4 times before Frank's gravelly voice answered. "Morrison here. This better be good." "Frank, it's Carol Henderson, Robert's wife. I'm sorry to call so late, but I'm in trouble and I need help." There was a pause, and when Frank spoke again, his voice was completely alert. "Carol? What kind of trouble? Are you hurt?" "It's complicated. I'm at my house, but I'm not safe here. Can you come get me? I'll explain everything when you arrive. Give me your address. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Frank, this is going to sound crazy, but don't come to the front door. My daughter and her husband are here and they can't know I'm leaving. Can you meet me at the end of the driveway?" Another pause. "Carol, are you telling me you're afraid of your own daughter?" "Yes," I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "Yes, I am." "I'll be there. Stay on the phone with me while you pack whatever you need." I gathered my purse, the photos on my phone, and a small bag of clothes, all while Frank stayed on. The line asking gentle questions and offering reassurance. His calm, professional manner helped me focus on what needed to be done, rather than drowning in the enormity of what was happening. True to his word, Frank arrived exactly 45 minutes later. I slipped out the back door and walked around the house to meet him at the street, my heart pounding with fear that Emma might wake up and discover my escape. But the house remained dark and quiet as I climbed into Frank's pickup truck. "Okay, Carol," Frank said as we drove away from the house. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told him about Emma's gradual takeover of my life, about the wedding day imprisonment, about the legal documents designed to steal my home and freedom. I told him about the forged psychological evaluation and the systematic isolation from friends and family. I told him about the crowbar and the broken door lock, about the midnight escape, and the desperate phone call to a man I barely knew but trusted instinctively. Frank listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification, but never expressing disbelief or judgment. When I finished, he was quiet for several minutes, processing what he had heard. "Carol," he finally said, "what your daughter did to you is called elder abuse, and it's a felony. What she's planning to do with those forged documents is fraud, which is also a felony. You're not crazy, you're not imagining things, and you're not helpless. But we need to be smart about how we handle this." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Someone believed me. Someone understood that what was happening to me was not only wrong, but criminal. Someone was willing to help me fight back. As we drove toward Frank's house in the early morning darkness, I realized that Emma had made one crucial mistake in her elaborate plan. She had underestimated me. She had seen only the grieving widow, the dependent mother, the woman who could be manipulated and controlled. She had never bothered to look deeper, to see the strength that had carried me through decades of challenges, the intelligence that had earned me a college degree and a successful career, the determination that had helped me build a life with Robert from nothing. Emma thought she had broken me, reduced me to a helpless old woman who would sign away her freedom rather than fight. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. And this time, I would be the one making the rules. The first call I would make tomorrow morning wouldn't be to a lawyer or the police, though those calls would come later. The first call would be to Dr. Patricia Coleman, the psychologist whose name appeared on the forged evaluation. I wanted to hear her voice when she tried to explain how she had evaluated a patient she had never met. I wanted to watch Emma's carefully constructed lies begin to unravel, one thread at a time. My daughter had taught me an important lesson about the difference between love and manipulation, between family loyalty and exploitation. Now it was time for me to teach her a lesson about the consequences of underestimating the woman who had raised her. Frank's guest bedroom smelled of cedar and old books, a comforting contrast to the musty basement I had escaped from just hours earlier. I lay awake watching the first hints of dawn creep through the curtains, my mind racing despite my exhausted body. Sleep had been impossible, not just because of the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, but because I kept thinking about the phone call I needed to make. Dr. Patricia Coleman. The name had been bothering me all night, nagging at something, in the back of my memory. Where had I heard that name before? It wasn't until I was lying in Frank's spare bed, staring at the ceiling in the pre-dawn darkness, that it finally clicked. Patricia Coleman wasn't just some random psychologist Emma had found to forge documents. She was David's aunt. I remembered now. David had mentioned her during one of those early family dinners when he and Emma were still in the honeymoon phase of their relationship. His father's sister, he had said, a retired psychologist who had moved to Arizona after her husband died. She lived in some retirement community near Phoenix, spent her days playing bridge and complaining about the heat. David had joked about how she always tried to psychoanalyze everyone at family gatherings, driving his cousins crazy with her amateur diagnoses. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just Emma's scheme. David was involved too, had been involved from the beginning. His family was involved. This was a conspiracy that went far deeper than I had imagined. with tentacles reaching across state lines and involving people I had never even met. I sat up in bed, my hands shaking, as I reached for my phone. 5:30 in the morning in Connecticut meant 3:30 in Arizona. Too early to call, but I took a screenshot of Dr. Coleman's contact information from the forged documents anyway. I would need it later, along with everything else I was planning to collect. Frank was already up when I made my way to the kitchen, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, making coffee with the methodical precision of a man who had been rising early for decades. He looked up when I entered, studying my face with those sharp detective eyes that probably missed nothing. "Couldn't sleep either," he said, pouring me a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted it. "Been thinking about your situation all night. We need to move fast, Carol. Once your daughter realizes you're gone, she's going to panic. Panicked people make mistakes, but they also do desperate things." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, grateful for both the caffeine and the steadying presence of this man who barely knew me but had already done more to help than my own flesh and blood. "Frank, I figured out something important. The psychologist who supposedly evaluated me, Dr. Patricia Coleman, she's David's aunt. This isn't just Emma. David's family is involved too." Frank's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't seem surprised. "Makes sense. Elder abuse schemes usually involve multiple players. Someone to gain the victim's trust, someone to provide false documentation, someone to handle the legal aspects. What else do you remember about this aunt?" "Not much. David mentioned her a few times over the years. Retired, lives in Arizona, used to be a psychologist before she moved out there. I think her husband died and she relocated to be closer to other family members. We'll need to verify whether she's actually involved or if they just stole her credentials," Frank said, making notes on a small pad he pulled from his shirt pocket. "Either way, it's fraud. But first things first, we need to get you somewhere safer than here." "Safer? But Emma doesn't even know you exist." Frank's expression was grim. "Carol, you've been missing from your basement prison for over 6 hours. Your daughter has probably discovered your escape by now, and she's going to be looking for you. She knows all your friends, your usual haunts, your credit card information. She might even report you as a missing person with dementia, get the police looking for a confused elderly woman who wandered away from home." The thought sent a chill through me. Of course Emma would think of that. She was smart, calculating, always 3 steps ahead. She would paint herself as the worried daughter desperately searching for her mentally ill mother, gathering sympathy and official support while making me look like exactly the kind of person who needed supervised care. "So where can I go that she won't think to look?" "I've got a friend who runs a women's shelter about 2 hours from here," Frank said. "Off-the-books kind of place for women who need to disappear for a while. She owes me a favor from way back. And she doesn't ask questions about why someone needs help." The idea of hiding in a women's shelter felt surreal, but I nodded. If that's what it took to stay safe while we figured out how to fight back, I would do it. I had already learned that survival sometimes required swallowing your pride and accepting help from unexpected places. "Before we go anywhere, though, we need to make some calls," Frank continued. "Starting with that psychologist in Arizona. The earlier the better, before anyone has a chance to coach her or warn her about what's coming." Frank handed me his phone, explaining that using his number would make it harder for Emma to trace the call back to me. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed the number from the forged documents, not sure what I would say or how I would react if Patricia Coleman turned out to be a willing participant in my daughter's scheme. The phone rang several times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello? Who is this? Do you know what time it is?" "Dr. Coleman, this is Carol Henderson. I'm calling about a psychological evaluation you supposedly conducted on me last month." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, who? I don't understand what you're talking about. I haven't conducted evaluations in over 3 years, not since I retired." "Ma'am, I have documents here with your signature stating that you evaluated me for mental competency and recommended supervised living arrangements. The evaluation is dated 3 weeks ago. That's impossible. Dr. Coleman's voice was fully alert now, with an edge of concern. Young lady, I don't know who you are or what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but I retired from practice in 2021. I moved to Arizona and haven't seen a patient since then. If someone is using my name and credentials fraudulently, that's a serious crime. Dr. Coleman, are you related to David Morrison? Your nephew? Another pause, longer this time. How do you know about David? Who are you, really? I'm David's mother-in-law. His wife Emma is my daughter, and I think they've been using your credentials to create fake psychological evaluations as part of a scheme to steal my house and force me into assisted living. The silence that followed was so long I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When Dr. Coleman finally spoke, her voice was shaking. Oh my God. Oh my dear God. I knew something was wrong when David asked me all those questions about my practice, about evaluation procedures and diagnostic codes. He said it was for a creative writing project, that he was helping a friend research psychological themes for a novel. What kind of questions? Everything. How I formatted my reports, what kind of letterhead I used, what tests I typically administered for competency evaluations. He even asked for copies of my old evaluation forms, said he wanted to make sure the fictional psychologist in this supposed novel sounded authentic. Dr. Coleman's voice grew stronger, angrier. I thought I was helping him with an innocent project. I never imagined he would use that information to forge documents. Do you still have records of what you gave him? Some of it, yes. I saved our email exchanges. Oh, honey, I am so sorry. I had no idea what he was really planning. This is my fault for being so trusting. Frank gestured for the phone and I handed it over. Dr. Coleman, this is Detective Frank Morrison, retired Connecticut State Police. I need you to gather everything you have related to David's requests and send it to me immediately. This is evidence in a felony elder abuse case, and we're going to need your cooperation to prosecute the people responsible. I could hear Dr. Coleman's voice through the phone, agitated but cooperative. Frank gave her his email address and extracted a promise that she would send everything within the hour. He also warned her that David might try to contact her once. He realized their scheme was unraveling and advised her to record any such conversations. When Frank hung up, I felt a mixture of relief and vindication. We had our first real piece of evidence, proof that the psychological evaluation was fraudulent. But we were also confirming that this conspiracy went deeper than I had feared, involving not just Emma and David, but extending to David's family members who had been manipulated into unknowing participation. That's one domino falling, Frank said with satisfaction. Now we need to make it an avalanche. What other professional services were involved in this scheme? Lawyers, real estate agents, medical doctors. I thought back through the documents I had photographed, trying to remember all the names and signatures I had seen. There was a lawyer, Jonathan Blake from Blake & Associates. He prepared the transfer documents and the power of attorney, papers. And there was something about a medical evaluation, too, from Dr. Stephen Walsh. Let's start with the lawyer. Professional misconduct is taken very seriously by the State Bar Association, especially when it involves elder abuse. The call to Jonathan Blake's office was more complicated. It was still early, before normal business hours, so we reached only an answering service. Frank left a message identifying himself as a retired detective investigating fraudulent documents and requesting an immediate callback about legal work done for Emma Morrison Henderson. The medical doctor was our next target. Dr. Stephen Walsh's office was in the same medical complex where my regular physician practiced, which immediately struck me as suspicious. Why would Emma choose a doctor I had never heard of when she knew? My regular doctor, well? Frank dialed Dr. Walsh's office and got through to a nurse who seemed flustered by his questions. No, Dr. Walsh had never examined a Carol Henderson. No, He had not signed any competency evaluations or medical recommendations for supervised living. In fact, Dr. Walsh had been on vacation in Europe for the entire month when the supposed examination had taken place. "Another forgery," Frank said grimly as he hung up. "Your daughter and her husband have been busy. The question is, how many other documents have they forged, and what else are they planning?" Before I could answer, Frank's phone rang. The caller ID showed Jonathan Blake's law office. Frank answered and put the call on speaker so I could hear. "Detective Morrison? This is Jonathan Blake. I got your message about Emma Henderson. I have to tell you I've been expecting a call like this." "What do you mean by that, Mr. Blake?" The documents Ms. Henderson brought to me raised several red flags. The medical and psychological evaluations looked legitimate on the surface, but something felt off about the whole situation. The daughter seemed extremely anxious to get everything processed quickly, and she was evasive when I asked to speak directly with her mother about the arrangements. Frank leaned forward. "But you prepared the documents anyway?" "I prepared them, yes, but I built in several safeguards. The power of attorney documents require notarized signatures from both parties, in person, with government-issued photo, ID. The property transfer can't be completed without a face-to-face meeting with Mrs. Henderson, during which I'm required to explain all the legal implications and ensure she understands what she's signing." "Has Mrs. Henderson signed anything yet?" "No, nothing. Ms. Henderson has called several times asking when we can schedule the signing, but I kept finding reasons to delay. My gut was telling me something wasn't right about this whole situation. I found my voice. "Mr. Blake, this is Carol Henderson. I never authorized my daughter to arrange any of this. I've never agreed to transfer my property or give anyone power of attorney. Everything she brought to you was based on forged medical and psychological evaluations." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Henderson, are you saying you're not mentally incapacitated? That you haven't been declared incompetent to handle your own affairs?" "I'm saying my daughter locked me in my basement yesterday to try to force me to sign these documents. I escaped in the middle of the night, and I'm now in hiding because I'm afraid of what she might do next." "Jesus Christ," Blake muttered. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to come to my office immediately. We need to document everything that's happened and begin the process of protecting your legal rights. This is fraud on a massive scale." Frank arranged to meet with Blake later that morning, but first he wanted to get me to the women's shelter where I would be safe while we gathered more evidence. As we prepared to leave his house, Frank's expression grew serious. "Carol, I need to warn you about what's coming next. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your daughter and her husband are going to face serious criminal charges. This could destroy your relationship with Emma permanently." I thought about Emma as a little girl, the way she used to climb into my lap when she was scared, the pride in her eyes when she graduated college, the joy on her face when she told me about David's proposal. Then I thought about yesterday, the cold calculation in her voice as she explained why I needed to be locked in the basement, the complete absence of love or concern in her eyes when she looked at me. "Frank, my relationship with Emma was already destroyed. I just didn't know it yet. The Emma I thought I loved doesn't exist anymore, if she ever did. What I'm fighting for now is my own survival and my right to live as a free person." The drive to the women's shelter took us through small towns and rural areas I had never seen before. Frank used the time to coach me on what to expect over the coming days and weeks. There would be police interviews, legal proceedings, possibly a court case if Emma and David decided to fight the charges. There would also be intense media attention once the story got out, because elder abuse cases involving family members always attracted public interest. The hardest part, Frank warned, will be the character assassination. Emma and David are going to claim you're mentally ill, that you're imagining all of this, that they were just trying to help. They'll find people to testify about your supposed confusion and forgetfulness. They'll paint themselves as loving family members trying to care for a difficult elderly relative. But we have evidence now. Dr. Coleman's testimony, the forged medical evaluation, the lawyer's concerns. Evidence is good, but public perception matters too. Elder abuse cases often come down to credibility, and juries can be sympathetic to young people who claim they were just trying to help their aging parents. We need to be prepared for a long fight. The women's shelter was located in a converted Victorian house in a small town whose name I didn't catch. From the outside, it looked like any other residential property, with no signs or indicators of its true purpose. Frank explained that anonymity was essential for the safety of the women who stayed there. The director, a woman named Maria Santos, met us at a side entrance and ushered us quickly inside. She was younger than I had expected, probably in her 40s, with graying hair and kind eyes that had clearly seen too much human suffering. Frank made brief introductions and explained that I needed a safe place to stay while we built a legal case against my family members. "We get all kinds here," Maria said matter-of-factly as she showed me to a small but clean room on the second floor. Domestic violence, financial abuse, family threats. Your situation isn't unusual, unfortunately. Adult children stealing from elderly parents happens more than people want to admit. The room contained a twin bed, a small dresser, and a chair by the window. It was sparse but comfortable, and most importantly, it felt safe. For the first time in months, I was in a place where Emma couldn't find me, couldn't manipulate me, couldn't control my movements or decisions. "The rules here are simple," Maria explained. "No visitors without prior approval. No sharing your location with anyone, even people you trust. We provide meals, basic necessities, and access to legal and counseling services. Most women stay for a few weeks while they get their situation sorted out." After Maria left, I sat on the narrow bed and called Frank to let him know I was settled. He was already on his way to meet with Jonathan Blake, and he promised to update me as soon as he had more information. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had allies, people who believed my story and were willing to fight for me. But I also felt profoundly sad. I thought about Emma as a child, how proud I had been of her intelligence and ambition. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike, helping her with homework, celebrating her achievements. Somewhere along the way, that bright, loving child had become a woman capable of imprisoning her own mother for money. How had I failed so completely to see the warning signs? My phone rang, interrupting my melancholy reflections. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer anyway. "Mom?" Emma's voice was strained, almost frantic. "Mom, where are you? I came down to check on you this morning and you were gone. I'm so worried. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The sound of her voice, so full of apparent concern, almost broke my resolve. This was my daughter, the child I had loved unconditionally for 28 years. Maybe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that could be resolved, if we just talked. But then I remembered the legal documents, the forged evaluations, the cold efficiency with which she had arranged my imprisonment. This concern was just another manipulation, another performance designed to make me doubt my own perceptions. "I'm fine, Emma. I'm somewhere safe." "Safe? What do you mean, safe? Mom, you're scaring me. You left the basement door all broken, and there's glass everywhere. Did you hurt yourself? Do you need medical attention?" "I need my freedom, Emma. I need my home back. I need you to stop trying to steal everything I own." There was a pause, and when Emma spoke again, her voice had changed. The frantic concern was gone, replaced by something harder, more calculating. "Mom, I think you're having an episode. This paranoia, these accusations, they're not like you. I think we need to get you to a doctor right away." "I've already spoken to Dr. Coleman, Emma, and Dr. Walsh. They've never heard of me, never evaluated me, never signed any of the documents you've been using to try to steal my house. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear Emma's mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew and how to respond. Mom, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're confused. You're not thinking clearly. Just tell me where you are and I'll come get you. We can work all of this out. The only thing I'm confused about is how I raised a daughter who could do this to me. How I could have been so blind to what kind of person you really are. Mom, please. Emma's voice cracked, and for a moment, she sounded like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I love you. I've always loved you. Everything I've done has been to protect you, to make sure you're safe and cared for. Protecting me by locking me in a basement? Caring for me by forging medical documents? Emma, I know what you've done. I know about the fraud, the conspiracy, all of it. The only question now is whether you're going to face the consequences with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you're going to keep lying until the police drag you away in handcuffs. Another long silence. When Emma spoke again, all pretense was gone. Her voice was cold, angry, the real Emma finally showing herself. You have no idea what you're doing, Mom. You think you're so smart, but you're just a confused old woman who can't take care of herself anymore. When this is over, when you're sitting in some state-run nursing home eating pureed food and watching game shows all day, remember that you brought it on yourself. I tried to be kind about this, tried to make the transition easy for you. But if you want to do this the hard way, we will. Is that a threat, Emma? It's reality. You can't win this fight. I have lawyers, doctors, people who will testify that you're mentally incompetent. I have documentation of your erratic behavior, your forgetfulness, your inability to manage your own affairs. You have nothing except the paranoid delusions of an aging woman who can't accept that she needs help. We'll see about that. I hung up before Emma could respond, my hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. But underneath the fear and hurt, I felt something else. Determination. Emma had just confirmed everything I suspected about her true nature. She had dropped the mask completely, revealing the calculating predator she had become. More importantly, she had underestimated me again. She thought I was alone, friendless, without resources or allies. She had no idea about Frank, about Maria, and the shelter, about the evidence we were gathering, or the legal case we were building. She was still playing the game by her own rules, not realizing that the rules had changed. My phone buzzed with a text message from Frank. Blake meeting very productive. Police interview scheduled for 2 p.m. We're going to nail them. I looked around the small, safe room that would be my home for the next few weeks and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Emma thought she had cornered me, thought she had eliminated all my options. She was about to learn that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who has the power to destroy you. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, I would be the one making the moves while Emma scrambled to keep up. She wanted to play hardball? Fine. But she had forgotten something important about the woman who raised her. I had been fighting battles and solving problems long before she was born, and I had never learned how to give up. The phone call with Emma had clarified something crucial for me. This wasn't just about getting my house back or proving my mental competency. This was about justice, about making sure that what happened to me couldn't happen to other vulnerable people. Emma and David had committed serious crimes, and they needed to face serious consequences. I spent the rest of the morning writing down everything I could remember about the past year, documenting every conversation, every manipulation, every red flag I had missed. Maria had provided me with a legal pad and encouraged me to record as much detail as possible. Memory could be unreliable, especially under stress, and having everything written down would help when it came time to give official statements. At noon, Frank arrived to take me to the police station for my interview. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Lisa Chang, a specialist in financial crimes and elder abuse. She was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 30s, but her manner was professional and thorough. "Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know that we take these cases very seriously," Detective Chang said as we settled into a small interview room. "Elder abuse is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, and perpetrators often assume they won't be caught because victims are afraid to report family members." The interview lasted nearly 3 hours. Detective Chang asked detailed questions about every aspect of Emma's behavior over the past year, from the subtle manipulations to the outright fraud. She was particularly interested in the timeline of events, how Emma had gradually gained control over my finances and living situation. "The pattern you're describing is textbook financial elder abuse," Chang explained. "Isolation from friends and family, gradual assumption of control over finances, false claims about the victim's mental capacity, and finally the attempt to force transfer of assets. Your daughter and son-in-law were following a very sophisticated playbook." "How sophisticated?" "You make it sound like they had professional help." "They might have. There are unfortunately people out there who specialize in helping families steal from elderly relatives. They provide coaching on how to establish mental incapacity, how to forge documents, how to manipulate the legal system. It's a growing criminal enterprise." Chang also explained that my escape from the basement and Emma's threatening phone call had elevated the charges from simple fraud to kidnapping and extortion. If convicted, Emma and David could face significant prison time. "The question now is whether they'll try to flee or whether they'll stick around and fight the charges. Based on what you've told me about your daughter's personality, I suspect she'll try to tough it out, claim she's the victim of a confused elderly woman's delusions." "What should I expect next?" "We'll be executing search warrants on your house and David's workplace within the next few hours. We're looking for additional forged documents, communications between the conspirators, any evidence of their planning and coordination. We'll also be interviewing Dr. Coleman and the other people whose credentials were used fraudulently." As we prepared to leave the police station, Chang had one final warning for me. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to understand that this case could take months or even years to resolve completely. Your daughter and her husband will almost certainly hire expensive lawyers who will try to discredit you and your testimony. They'll claim you're mentally ill, that you're vindictive, that you're an unreliable witness. Are you prepared for that kind of fight?" I thought about the little girl who used to beg me to read her one more bedtime story, who cried when her goldfish died, who hugged me tight when I dropped her off for her first day of college. Then I thought about the cold, calculating woman who had locked me in a basement and threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent. "Detective Chang, I've already lost my daughter. The person who did this to me isn't the child I raised. She's a stranger wearing Emma's face. If fighting this case is what it takes to protect other families from going through what I've experienced, then I'm prepared for whatever comes next." Frank drove me back to the shelter in contemplative silence. We were both thinking about what Detective Chang had told us about the long legal battle ahead and the emotional toll it would take. But we were also thinking about the search warrants being executed, about Emma and David's shock when police officers arrived at their door with court orders. "Frank, do you think they'll try to run?" "Honestly, I think your daughter is too arrogant to run. She's convinced she's smarter than everyone else, that she can talk her way out of this or manipulate the situation to her advantage. Running would be an admission that her plan failed, and people like Emma don't admit failure easily. And David's the wild card. He's the one with family connections that helped make this possible, but he's also the one with the most to lose if they get caught. If he's smart, he'll distance himself from Emma and try to cut a deal with prosecutors. If he's stupid, he'll stick with her and go down with the ship." We arrived back at the shelter just as Maria was serving lunch to the residents. The dining room was filled with women of all ages, from teenagers to seniors, all of whom had found themselves in situations where they needed protection from people who were supposed to care about them. I fit right in, just another woman whose trust had been betrayed by family. After lunch, I retreated to my room and tried to process everything that had happened over the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I had been a prisoner in my own basement, helpless and isolated. Now I was free, safe, and building a criminal case against my captors. The transformation was dizzying, but also empowering. My phone rang around 3 o'clock. Detective Chung's number appeared on the caller. ID. Mrs. Henderson, I wanted to update you on the search warrants. We found a treasure trove of evidence at your house. Emails between your daughter and son-in-law discussing their plans, research on elder abuse techniques, even drafts of forged documents. It's enough to support multiple felony charges. What about Emma and David? Were they there when you arrived? They were, and they were not happy to see us. Your daughter tried to claim that you were mentally ill and that we were being manipulated by a confused elderly woman. She demanded to know where you were and insisted that you needed immediate medical attention. Did they resist the search? Initially, yes. They claimed we didn't have probable cause and threatened to call their lawyer. But the warrant was solid, and they eventually complied. We also served them with restraining orders prohibiting any contact with you. The restraining orders were Frank's idea, designed to prevent Emma and David from trying to intimidate me or interfere with the investigation. It meant they couldn't come near me, couldn't call me, couldn't even try to contact me through third parties. There's something else you should know, Chung continued. We found evidence that this wasn't their first attempt at this kind of scheme. There are emails discussing other potential targets, other elderly relatives who might be vulnerable to similar manipulation. The news hit me like a physical blow. Emma and David hadn't just betrayed me. They had been planning to do the same thing to other people. This was their business model, their way of making money by destroying families and stealing from vulnerable people. How many others? We're still investigating, but it looks like they had identified at least 3 other potential victims. Your escape and the subsequent investigation probably prevented them from destroying other families. After Chung hung up, I sat in my small room feeling a mixture of vindication and horror. Vindication because the evidence was proving everything I had alleged about Emma's criminal behavior. Horror because my own daughter had become the kind of predator who systematically targeted elderly people for financial exploitation. That evening, Frank called with more updates. Jonathan Blake had provided police with detailed records of his interactions with Emma, including recorded phone calls where she had pressured him to expedite the document processing. Dr. Coleman had sent a comprehensive package of evidence showing how David had manipulated her into providing information that was later used to forge psychological evaluations. The prosecution case is getting stronger by the hour, Frank reported. But there's also bad news. Emma and David have hired a high-powered criminal defense attorney, someone with a reputation for getting wealthy clients off on technicalities. How can they afford expensive lawyers? Neither of them makes much money. That's what I'm wondering too. Either they have financial resources we don't know about, or someone else is bankrolling their defense. Could be David's family, could be profits from previous scams we haven't discovered yet. The possibility that Emma and David had been running this con for years, victimizing other families while I thought I was getting closer to my loving daughter, made me feel sick. How many other people had been imprisoned, threatened, or manipulated while I was obliviously enjoying family dinners and holiday celebrations? As I prepared for bed in the unfamiliar room, I thought about the long road ahead. Detective Chung was right that this case could take years to resolve, that Emma and David would fight every step of the way, that they would try to destroy my credibility and paint me as a delusional old woman. But I also thought about the evidence we had gathered in just one day, the professional support I had found, the safe place I now had to stay while justice took its course. Most importantly, I thought about the other potential victims who had been protected by my decision to fight back, rather than submit to Emma's demands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new attempts by Emma and David to manipulate the system in their favor. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was going to sleep as a free woman in a safe place, surrounded by people who believed in my story and were committed to helping me seek justice. The woman who had been locked in that basement yesterday was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, smarter, and more determined than Emma had ever imagined possible. The real fight was just beginning, but I was ready for whatever came next. 6 weeks had passed since my escape from the basement, and the Connecticut Superior Court was buzzing with activity as the most talked-about elder abuse case in recent memory was about to reach its climax. I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Frank Morrison and Maria Santos, watching as Emma and David were led into the courtroom in handcuffs. The sight of my daughter in orange prison scrubs should have broken my heart, but instead I felt only a cold satisfaction that justice was finally being served. The case had moved faster than anyone expected. The mountain of evidence we had gathered, combined with testimony from Dr. Coleman and other victims who had come forward once the story broke, had made this an open and shut prosecution. Emma and David's expensive lawyer had tried every trick in the book, from claiming I was mentally incompetent to suggesting I had fabricated the entire story for attention. None of it had worked. The breakthrough had come 3 weeks earlier when investigators discovered that Emma and David were part of a larger criminal network specializing in elder abuse schemes. The FBI had been tracking this organization for months, and my case had provided the missing piece that allowed them to roll up the entire operation. What started as a simple fraud case had become a federal racketeering investigation involving dozens of conspirators across multiple states. Judge Patricia Williams called the court to order, her stern expression leaving no doubt about how she viewed the defendants. Judge Williams had a reputation for taking elder abuse cases personally, having cared for her own aging parents before their deaths. The prosecution had specifically requested her courtroom, knowing she would not be sympathetic to claims that Emma and David were just confused young people trying to help a difficult elderly relative. Before we proceed with sentencing, Judge Williams announced, "I want to hear victim impact statements. Mrs. Henderson, you may approach the podium." I stood slowly, my legs trembling slightly despite all the preparation I had done for this moment. For 6 weeks, I had been looking forward to this opportunity to speak directly to Emma about what she had done to me. Now that the moment had arrived, I wasn't sure I could find the words to express the depth of her betrayal. Emma sat at the defendant's table, her face carefully composed in an expression of wounded innocence. Even now, even after all the evidence had been presented and her guilt established beyond any doubt, she was still playing the role of the misunderstood daughter who had only been trying to help her confused mother. The performance was flawless, but I was no longer fooled by it. "Your Honor," I began, my voice stronger than I had expected. "When I think about what my daughter did to me, I don't just think about the money she tried to steal or the house she tried to take. I think about the trust she destroyed, the relationship she murdered, the mother she buried alive while pretending to love her." I turned to look directly at Emma, forcing her to meet my eyes. "Emma, you locked me in a basement on your wedding day. You forged medical documents to make me seem mentally incompetent. You conspired with strangers to steal everything I had worked for, everything your father had left me. But worst of all, you did it while telling me you loved me, while pretending to be concerned about my welfare." Emma's carefully composed mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not remorse, but anger that her performance wasn't working, that she couldn't manipulate her way out of this situation the way she had manipulated so many others. For 28 years, I believed I had raised a daughter who would love and protect me in my old age. Instead, I raised a predator who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. "You didn't just steal my possessions, Emma. You stole my faith in human nature, my ability to trust, my sense of security in the world. Those are things that can never be returned to me, no matter what sentence this court imposes." I paused, gathering my thoughts for the most important part of my statement. "But I want you to know that your betrayal also taught me something valuable. It taught me that I am stronger than you ever imagined, smarter than you gave me credit for, and more resilient than you thought possible. You expected me to crumble, to sign your papers and disappear quietly into the kind of living death you had planned for me. Instead, I fought back. I exposed your crimes. I protected other families from suffering what you put me through." The courtroom was completely silent as I delivered my final words. "Emma, you are no longer my daughter. You are a criminal who destroyed my family for money. I hope you spend every day of your prison sentence thinking about the loving mother you betrayed and the life you threw away for greed." I returned to my seat, feeling emotionally drained but also strangely liberated. I had said everything I needed to say, had finally told Emma exactly what I thought of her actions. Frank squeezed my hand supportively as the prosecutor rose to present the government's sentencing recommendation. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh had become something of a local celebrity during the trial, her passionate prosecution of the case earning her praise from elder rights advocates across the state. She approached the podium with a thick folder of documents, ready to detail the full scope of Emma and David's criminal enterprise. "Your Honor, the defendants in this case are not misguided young people who made poor decisions while trying to care for an elderly relative. They are sophisticated criminals who participated in a multi-state conspiracy to defraud vulnerable senior citizens. The evidence shows that they specifically targeted elderly people who had recently lost spouses, knowing that grief and isolation would make these victims more susceptible to manipulation." Walsh outlined the extensive evidence against Emma and David, including their participation in at least 7 other elder abuse schemes across Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts. In each case, they had played specific roles. Emma would befriend the victims and gain their trust, while David would provide forged medical and psychological evaluations to support claims of mental incompetency. "The defendants were not operating independently," Walsh continued. "They were part of a criminal network that included corrupt medical professionals, lawyers willing to prepare fraudulent documents, and even nursing home administrators who received kickbacks for accepting victims who had been illegally declared incompetent. The total amount stolen from elderly victims exceeds $2 million, representing the life savings and financial security of dozens of families." The revelation that Emma and David had been involved in so many other cases hit me like a physical blow. While I had been celebrating holidays with them, while I had been planning Emma's wedding and welcoming David into the family, they had been systematically destroying other families. I thought about all those dinners where Emma had seemed so interested in my friends, asking about their health, their finances, their family situations. She hadn't been making conversation. She had been scouting for potential victims. David's lawyer, a slick criminal defense attorney named Marcus Rothstein, rose to present his client's case for leniency. Rothstein had been trying throughout the trial to portray David as a reluctant participant who had been manipulated by Emma into joining her schemes. "Your Honor, my client is deeply remorseful for his involvement in these crimes. Mr. Morrison was a young man in love who made terrible decisions while under the influence of a master manipulator. The evidence shows that Emma Henderson was the driving force behind these schemes, that she recruited my client and exploited his feelings for her to gain his cooperation. Rothstein's strategy was transparent: throw Emma under the bus and hope that David could get a lighter sentence by cooperating with authorities. It was a betrayal that seemed fitting, given how the couple had betrayed so many others. There was no honor among thieves, and when faced with serious prison time, their partnership had dissolved into mutual recrimination. Emma's lawyer, Patricia Novak, took a different approach. She had been hired specifically for her reputation. In defending white-collar criminals, and her strategy was to attack the credibility of the victims and the quality of the evidence. Your Honor, my client has been the victim of a rush to judgment fueled by media sensationalism and prosecutorial ambition. Emma Morrison is a young woman who made mistakes while trying to care for a mother whose mental health was deteriorating. The so-called evidence against her consists largely of the confused recollections of elderly people whose memory and judgment have been compromised by age and illness. Novak's argument was insulting but predictable. Even with overwhelming evidence of fraud and conspiracy, even with testimony from multiple victims and co-conspirators, Emma's lawyer was still trying to paint her as a misunderstood caregiver rather than a calculating criminal. The prosecution has painted a picture of an elaborate criminal conspiracy, but the reality is much simpler. Emma Morrison was a daughter struggling to cope with her mother's increasing confusion and inability to care for herself. Yes, she made mistakes in how she handled the situation, but those mistakes were born of love and concern, not criminal intent. I watched Emma during her lawyer's presentation, looking for any sign of genuine remorse or acknowledgement of what she had done. Instead, I saw the same cold calculation that had characterized her behavior throughout our relationship. She was evaluating Novak's performance, calculating whether the strategy was working, already planning her next move if the current approach failed. Judge Williams listened to all the arguments with the patient attention of someone who had heard every possible excuse for criminal behavior. When the lawyers finished their presentations, she called for a brief recess to consider the sentencing options. The courtroom buzzed with conversation as spectators and media representatives speculated about what punishment Emma and David would receive. Frank and I stepped outside for some fresh air, both of us emotionally exhausted by the proceedings. 6 weeks of investigation, trial preparation, and legal hearings had taken their toll, but we were finally approaching the end of this ordeal. "How are you holding up?" Frank asked, studying my face with the same careful attention he had shown since the day I first called him for help. "I'm ready for this to be over," I admitted. "I'm ready to start rebuilding my life without looking over my shoulder, without wondering what Emma might do next." "You know she'll probably appeal the conviction, try to drag this out for years. Let her. The important thing is that she won't be free to hurt anyone else while the appeals process plays out. And every day she spends in prison is a day when some other elderly person is safe from her schemes." When court reconvened, Judge Williams had clearly made her decision. Her expression was stern as she called Emma and David to stand before the bench for sentencing. "I have presided over hundreds of criminal cases during my time on the bench," Judge Williams began, "but few have disturbed me as much as this one. Elder abuse is one of the most despicable crimes in our society because it specifically targets our most vulnerable citizens and exploits the trust that should exist between family members." The judge reviewed the evidence against Emma and David, emphasizing the premeditated nature of their crimes and their lack of remorse throughout the trial. She also noted that their participation in a larger criminal conspiracy made them responsible not just for their direct actions, but for the broader harm caused by the entire network. "Emma Morrison, you have been convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, kidnapping, and racketeering. These crimes represent a systematic campaign to destroy your own mother's life for financial gain. You showed no mercy to your victim, no recognition of her humanity, no acknowledgement of the love and sacrifice she had shown you throughout your life." Judge Williams paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims of your criminal enterprise, an amount totaling $2, $3 million. 12 years. Emma would be 40 years old when she was released, assuming she served her full sentence without early parole. The restitution order meant that even after her release, she would be financially responsible for the damage she had caused to dozens of families." David Morrison, you have been convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering. While the evidence suggests you were a willing participant rather than the mastermind of these schemes, your cooperation with authorities and expression of remorse have been noted by the court. David received an 8-year sentence with the possibility of parole after serving 5 years. The difference in their sentences reflected the prosecution's view that Emma had been the primary organizer of the criminal enterprise, while David had been a valuable but secondary participant. As the bailiffs prepared to escort Emma and David back to their holding cells, Emma turned to look at me one final time. I expected to see hatred or defiance in her eyes, but instead I saw something that might have been regret. Not remorse for her crimes, but regret that her plan had failed, that she had underestimated the woman she had tried to destroy. The trial was over, but my work was not finished. In the months that followed, I became an advocate for elder abuse victims, working with law enforcement agencies and social service organizations to identify and prosecute similar crimes. The publicity from Emma's case had led to dozens of other families coming forward with stories of financial exploitation and abuse by trusted relatives. I also testified before the state legislature in support of stronger elder abuse laws and better protections for vulnerable adults. My basement prison had become a symbol of how families could be destroyed by greed, but my escape and fight for justice had also become a symbol of hope for other victims. The house in Westfield was sold, the proceeds going partly to pay for legal expenses and partly to establish a foundation dedicated to elder abuse prevention. I could never live there again, not after what had happened in that basement, but I could ensure that the property would generate resources to help other families avoid similar tragedies. I moved to a smaller house closer to Frank, who had become not just an ally, but a genuine friend. We had lunch together every week, comparing notes on new cases and sharing updates on the various legal proceedings still working their way through the courts. The criminal network that Emma and David had participated in was gradually being dismantled, with new arrests and convictions announced regularly. Dr. Coleman visited from Arizona 6 months after the trial, wanting to apologize in person for her unwitting role in the conspiracy. She was a sweet woman who had been genuinely horrified to learn how her trust had been exploited, and she had become an active advocate for protecting professional credentials from fraudulent use. The most difficult part of my new life was learning to trust again. Emma's betrayal had shaken my faith in human nature so deeply that I found myself questioning the motives of everyone who tried to help me. Was the checkout clerk at the grocery store really being friendly, or was she evaluating me as a potential victim? Was the neighbor who offered to help with yard work genuinely kind, or was he looking for ways to exploit my vulnerability? Therapy helped, as did the support of other abuse survivors I met through my advocacy work. Gradually, I learned to distinguish between reasonable caution and paranoid suspicion, between healthy skepticism and destructive mistrust. The process was slow and sometimes painful, but it was necessary for rebuilding my life. Emma wrote to me from prison exactly 1 year after her sentencing. The letter was carefully worded, clearly written with input from her legal team as part of a potential appeal strategy. She claimed to have found religion in prison, to have realized the error of her ways, to be genuinely remorseful for the pain she had caused. I read the letter once and then threw it away without responding. Emma had had 28 years to show me love and respect, and she had chosen instead to betray everything good about our relationship. Her sudden discovery of conscience felt as calculated and manipulative as everything else she had done. 2 years after the trial, I received a call from Detective Chang with news that would have shocked me earlier, but no longer surprised me. Emma had been caught running a commissary scam inside the prison, manipulating other inmates into giving her their money in exchange for promised favors that never materialized. Even behind bars, even after losing everything, she was still looking for ways to exploit and deceive vulnerable people. "Leopards don't change their spots," Frank observed. When I told him about Emma's latest scheme, Your daughter is what she is, Carol. The only difference now is that she's surrounded by people who are just as cunning and ruthless as she is. David, by contrast, seemed to be making a genuine effort at rehabilitation. He had enrolled in educational programs, was working in the prison library, and had written sincere letters of apology to several of his victims. His cooperation with ongoing investigations had led to additional arrests and had helped recover stolen assets for some families. I felt no sympathy for David, but I could at least respect his apparent recognition that what he had done was wrong. Emma, even after conviction and imprisonment, still seemed to view herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own destruction. On the 3rd anniversary of my escape from the basement, I visited the house in Westfield one final time before the new owners took possession. The basement had been completely renovated, transformed from a prison into a bright family room where children would play and families would gather for holidays. The new owners, a young couple with twin toddlers, had no idea what had happened in that space, and I saw no reason to burden them with the knowledge. Standing in the kitchen where I had once felt so happy and secure, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years earlier. That woman had been naive, trusting, easily manipulated by someone who claimed to love her. She had been willing to surrender her independence and autonomy in exchange for the illusion of family harmony and security. The woman I had become was harder, more suspicious, less trusting of other people's motives. But she was also stronger, more self-reliant, more aware of her own worth and capabilities. The transformation had been painful, but it had been necessary. Sometimes you had to lose everything you thought you wanted in order to discover what you actually needed. As I drove away from the house for the last time, I thought about Emma sitting in her prison cell, probably planning her next appeal or her next scheme. She had stolen 5 years of my life, destroyed my faith in family bonds, and forced me to rebuild my entire existence from scratch. But she had also taught me something valuable about my own resilience and strength. I was 70 years old now, living independently in my new home, financially secure despite the legal expenses and emotional trauma of the past few years. I had friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide for them. I had meaningful work helping other abuse victims navigate the legal system and rebuild their lives. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment again, to recognize manipulation and exploitation before it could take root. Emma had tried to destroy me, but she had failed. Instead of breaking me, she had forged me into someone stronger and more determined than I had ever been before. The basement prison she had created had become the crucible where I discovered who I really was beneath the facade of the compliant, dependent mother she had tried to create. 3 years later, I was still standing, still fighting, still helping other families avoid the trap that Emma had set for me. That was my revenge and my redemption, turning her betrayal into something that could protect and empower other people who found themselves in similar situations. The little girl who had once played wedding in my living room was gone forever, replaced by a convicted felon serving time for elder abuse and fraud. But the woman who had raised that little girl had discovered reserves of strength and courage she never knew she possessed. In the end, that was the real victory. Not Emma's imprisonment, but my own liberation from the prison of fear and dependency she had built around me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.